What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm Anthony Rivardo checking in with you from London, England. Yes, still talking Giants all the way across the pond. And there was some big news in the NFL this week, particularly in the NFC East, regarding one of the New York Giants' biggest rivals, the Dallas Cowboys, trading for George Pickens from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, it was a pretty big deal, a third-round pick going to the Steelers in exchange for Pickens, and then a late-round pick swap as well between the two teams. But now the Dallas Cowboys are getting Dak Prescott back healthy, and they're pairing CeeDee Lamb with a true WR2 in George Pickens, who's reportedly seeking a major extension this upcoming offseason. But we're not here to talk much about George Pickens and his contract demands. Instead, we are here to talk about how the New York Giants will match up with the Dallas Cowboys, as well as the Washington Commanders and Philadelphia Eagles. Because if there's one thing that is true about the NFC East, it is loaded with playmaking talent. And so I want to break down today how the New York Giants secondary matches up with a lot of this talent that they're going to be facing in the 2025 season. Of course, I'm not just talking about CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. And if you look over at the Philadelphia Eagles, that A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith duo, it's arguably better than the Dallas Cowboys duo. In fact, I would argue that it is better. I would argue it's the best in the division and arguably the best in the NFL, outside of maybe the Cincinnati Bengals. But then you look over at the Washington Commanders, and they also got the memo this offseason. Not only did they want to keep having one premier playmaker and wide receiver in Terry McLaurin, they went out and they traded for Deebo Samuel, giving themselves a second wide receiver who can take the pressure off of Jaden Daniels' shoulders. So looking at that trend, one of my main takeaways from this, before we dive into how the secondary matches up, one of my major takeaways is that the New York Giants are still missing something on offense. When you look at these offenses in the NFC East and you look at the offenses around the NFL, many of them feature two premier playmakers. Even if you're talking about the Detroit Lions with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in the backfield, if you're talking about the Vikings with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, or if you're going over to the Baltimore Ravens with Derrick Henry in the backfield, Zay Flowers as their wide receiver, or if you want to consider Lamar Jackson being a playmaker in his own right. And then, like we said with the Philadelphia Eagles, they've got Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. And then on the ground, of course, Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts. So they have two duos on their offensive lineup. Essentially, my point being, the Giants have Malik Neighbors versus the world. Now, obviously, I've expressed a lot of excitement and confidence in the Giants' backfield that features Tyrone Tracy Jr. and Cam Scadaboo. Scadaboo! All the way from London, I'm doing the Scadaboos. I know all of my London friends really enjoy that one. But I really like that backfield. However, it's not proven. It's a young, unproven talent backfield with a rookie and a second-year player that still has a lot to learn. So the Giants really don't have two established great playmakers in this offense. The only thing that they have is, of course, Malik Neighbors. So what I basically am taking away from this acquisition that the Cowboys have made is that they recognize the best offenses in the NFL have two or more playmakers, and the New York Giants aren't going to have those two elite playmakers this year, but perhaps this is going to be a talking point as we move towards 2026. Now, we know that this season is a little bit of a gap year, right? We've got Russell Wilson competing as a starting quarterback this season, but hopefully in 2026, Jackson Dart is ready to take over, and hopefully he steps into a lineup that features not only Malik Neighbors as his WR1, but another true playmaking threat as his WR2. That should be the main goal, and that should be the main takeaway that the New York Giants have from the Cowboys trading for George Pickens. But let's go ahead and move into this matchup discussion. Do the Giants have what it takes to match up against the wide receivers in the NFC East? In short, it's going to be a tough matchup, but now we dive into it at length. And where I will say that the New York Giants have an edge, I think, is in the slot at the nickel cornerback position. I think Drew Phillips showed a lot of promise as a rookie last year, third-round pick out of Kentucky. We all know how great he was. We watched the games. If you were watching Giants games last year, it's impossible for you not to know who Drew Phillips is, because he flashed every single game during his rookie season. So moving into this year, I do feel confident that he's going to continue to play well, and that when the New York Giants are facing a team that has a strong slot wide receiver, Drew Phillips can hold it down and perform at a high level. Where I am concerned is not at CB1 anymore. It's more at CB2. Now, CB1 is going to be Paulson Adebo. The New York Giants just signed him to a pretty big contract this past offseason, coming over from the New Orleans Saints, also coming off of a pretty significant injury. I believe it was a broken fibula, and that took him a long time to recover from. but he is healthy. He's expected to be 100% ready for the start of training camp and, of course, the regular season, barring any unforeseen setbacks. So when you're looking at Paulson Adebo and what he brings to the secondary, it's experience, it's stability, and it's playmaking ability. He has a lot of forced incompletions, a lot of pass breakups, and a lot of interceptions throughout his NFL career, and that's something that the New York Giants desperately needed. So when we're talking about how the Giants match up with these wide receivers, well, a lot of them are really good at contested catches. Think about A.J. Brown and the way he's able to go up there, pluck it out of the air no matter who is jumping on his back. Or CeeDee Lamb also has that ability. And you know what? Terry McLaurin is pretty good with contested receptions as well. So what the New York Giants needed was a guy who could win some of those 50-50 balls, get his hand on the football, and not allow A.J. Brown to basically go Randy Moss in his prime against all of the Giants' defensive backs. Enter Paulson Adebo. So I'm not saying that Paulson Adebo is this elite all-pro CB1 that's going to lock down A.J. Brown on a week-to-week basis, but is he going to be able to match up and compete a whole lot better than Deonte Banks did last year? 100%. I absolutely think that he will. But then we go to CB2, and like I said, that's where my issue is. That's where my cause for concern is, and that is Deonte Banks. I really like Deonte Banks, and I think he's really talented. I think all of you who have been viewing this channel for a long time know that I am one of the biggest Deonte Banks fans in the Giants fandom. I wanted him in that NFL draft. The Giants got him, and I basically did flips on this channel. I was super excited about him. He had the best relative athletic score in that draft class. He's an elite athlete, and he is a very smart cornerback when playing, as I've always said, zone coverage. Now, the problem is when the Giants drafted Deonte Banks, they drafted him to play under Wink Martindale, a defensive coordinator who historically plays more man coverage than anybody else in the NFL. And the issue that we ran into was everybody falling into the trap of looking at Deonte Banks, the way that he plays, which is physical and fast, and saying, oh, he's a prototypical man coverage cornerback. But if you look throughout his NFL career, and if you go back into his collegiate career, if you look at the advanced stats on Pro Football Focus, his stats in man coverage versus his stats in zone coverage, much different. And if you had to guess where he was better, you would probably assume man because you've been told he's a man cover corner. But in fact, he has historically always struggled in man coverage. The overwhelming majority of the touchdowns that he's surrendered, the overwhelming majority of the yards that he's surrendered, receptions have all come in man coverage. And the New York Giants last year, yes, did play more zone coverage, but they still ran man coverage top 10 highest rate in the NFL. They didn't play enough zone coverage, in my opinion, for Deonte Banks. So this is where my concern comes from. It's not necessarily about Deonte Banks, the player, because like I said, he's super athletic, he's physical, he's fast, and he's very talented. My concern comes from, will Shane Bowen actually use him properly this season? Or is he going to stick to playing a lot of man coverage, not blitzing, not taking pressure off of these cornerbacks who are stuck in man coverage with their backs to the football? Deonte Banks with his back to the football is probably the worst player in the NFL because anytime his back is to the football, he never gets his head turned around. When you're playing man coverage, you're constantly with your back to the football. So again, like I'm saying, zone coverage is the solution to fixing Deonte Banks. If the Giants shift their defense this year, they run a lot of nickel to keep Drew Phillips on the field at that slot cornerback position, the fifth defensive back. If they have out wide, Paulson Adebo on one side, and on the other side, they have Deonte Banks. But they run a lot of cover 3 or cover 2 zones. That will take a lot of pressure off of Banks. It will have him playing with the football in front of him. He can react almost like a safety from his zone coverage and just break on the football, make some clutch tackles on those wide receivers because he was a pretty strong tackler during his collegiate career. It hasn't translated to the NFL, but again, it's a different game and it takes a while to adjust. But primarily, all of the issues that I've seen in Banks' game, his inability to get his hands on the football, turn around quickly, his tendency to get beat off the line of scrimmage, all of those relate to the Giants playing pure man coverage with minimal safety help over top. Now that they've got a great safety signed to the roster in Javon Holland, who I'm surprised it took me this long to mention, having Holland over top in a zone and having Banks and Adebo underneath in their zones, obviously Newman entering his second season, the other safety in his zone coverage is how this team is going to be able to maximize the strengths of Deonte Banks and get him to play at a legitimate starting level. So it all boils down to Banks. As we were saying, if we're looking at these matchups, I trust Paulson Adebo to do a good enough job. Again, he's not an elite CB1 all-pro first team, but he is a pretty good cornerback and definitely a starting caliber cornerback at that. So him on one side against A.J. Brown, I think he can do a good job. It's just going to come down to, can Shane Bowen finally get the most out of Deonte Banks as he covers the likes of George Pickens, Deebo Samuel, and Devontae Smith. Although Devontae Smith does line up in the slot a lot, so that's where I do trust Drew Phillips to come into play and pretty much solve that position for the New York Giants, because the slot cornerback problem has been one for many years before Drew Phillips. So now looking at it in a vacuum before we wrap up this short episode here from London, I do think the Giants secondary is a lot better this year than it has been in years past. I think the additions of Javon Holland and Paulson Adebo are massive. And I think that allowing Banks to step into a CB2 role takes a lot of pressure off his shoulders and should allow him to play a much better and cleaner brand of football. And so when you're looking at all of the wide receivers that the Giants are going to match up with, they've got an absolute gauntlet this year. There's no way around that. Obviously, in the NFC East, it's really strong, but they do face the Vikings. They do face the Bears, who have a nice tandem. They face the Packers, who just added a first-round rookie. We'll see how good he is. And they face other teams, the Lions, the Chiefs, the Chargers. It's a tough schedule, as we've talked about ad nauseum. But the New York Giants did get a lot better this offseason, and their secondary, in fact, improved quite a bit. And the number one thing that's going to help the secondary match up against the likes of an A.J. Brown, a Devontae Smith, a Pickens, a Lamb, the number one thing that's going to help them is that defensive line, and that's where we'll wrap up with this. The Giants' defensive line is going to be the engine that drives this team. When you've got guys like Abdul Carter, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau, and Darius Alexander, even all on that front line, you don't have to rely on your cornerbacks to stay in coverage for more than 3 seconds or 5 seconds sometimes. I mean, there were times last year where the pass rush just wouldn't get home for the Giants. The secondary was running around for their life, basically. And you know what? In the NFL, eventually, someone's going to break open, and these quarterbacks are too good. They're going to see that open man, and they're going to hit them downfield. But now the New York Giants, with a really good defensive line in front of them, a potential all-pro talent prospect in Abdul Carter, a Pro Bowl level talent in Brian Burns, and an all-pro level talent in Dexter Lawrence, and then a couple other good players in Alexander and Thibodeau, this defensive line should be the key to fixing the secondary, because the ball should be coming out of the quarterback's hands a lot quicker. So instead of having Banks running around for 3 to 4 full seconds with his back to the football, maybe he's only running for 1 or 2 seconds. Then the ball is thrown because there was pressure, and now he's in a more advantageous position to get his hands on the football and break up those passes. So essentially, in a vacuum, the real reason the New York Giants defense and secondary has an ability to match up with this gauntlet of wide receivers that they're going to face, it's because of the defensive line. The defensive line is the key to everything for the Giants this year, and it is the exact matchup advantage that the Giants need in order to beat these NFC East teams with really, really good wide receiver talent across the board. But let me know your thoughts of what do you think about the Giants secondary and their defensive line as they prepare to match up with these teams in the NFC East in 2025. Do you think that they can handle the combo of CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens? Do you think they can handle Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown? Over the last 4 years, they haven't been able to handle them much because they've definitely had some big highlight plays against us. But of course, the Washington Commanders, that's the team that Giants fans have felt like, hey, at least we'll beat Washington this year. We felt like that for many years. Last year, totally different story with Jaden Daniels under center. But this year, I'm hoping that the Giants can be competitive with them and with the rest of the teams in their division once again. It's unacceptable, the Giants' record against the division last year. It's unacceptable that Brian Daboll has never beaten the Dallas Cowboys. These are all things that the Giants need to fix this season. And if they don't, well, jobs are on the line. People are going to get fired, and they'll be moving in a new direction. But again, I do think that the Giants match up a lot better on paper this year than they did last year with Deonte Banks and the corpse of Adoree Jackson. So hopefully they can run this defense properly. It all rests on Shane Bowen. Please call a good defense this year. We are begging you, Shane Bowen, to do better. And if you do better, this Giants defense has a lot of talent on it. They should be able to match up with these wide receivers. And then it'll just be up to Russell Wilson and the New York Giants offense. So we'll see how it goes. Again, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new. Drop your thoughts down below in the comment section. Also drop your food recommendations if you're from London or if you've visited London. I'll read through them and I'll go ahead and see what I decide to grub on today as I walk around this beautiful city. But I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go New York Giants.
Perfect.